There are currently almost 1.5 billion people locked up in prisons around the world. Almost every country on earth is affected. Superpowers, developing nations, and everything in between. All participating in an operation so massive it crosses oceans, borders, and political divides. It's actually so widespread that out of all 195 countries, more than 135 have deliberately decided on building prisons to hold all these people, constructing entire systems of mass incarceration, spending billions upon billions of dollars on what exactly? Well, buckle up, because you're about to hear one of the most jaw-dropping stories in human history. The story of how a single military defeat centuries ago set off a chain reaction, leading humanity to construct the largest, most widespread prison system the world has ever seen.
From Prussia, delegations from all over the world, east and west, came to see the Prussian miracle, where a small, poor country could produce profitable factories and, in particular, a very well-disciplined and formidable army simply by passing its young citizenry through forced schooling.
The story begins in the early 1800s in a place called Prussia. A powerful European kingdom at the time was getting absolutely crushed on the battlefield by one of the most feared military commanders the world has ever seen, who was none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Prussian leaders were furious. They needed to know why their soldiers were failing, so they did what any desperate government would do. They searched for something to blame, and the conclusion they reached was this. The problem, according to Prussian leadership, was that their men lacked discipline, organization, and worst of all, they were following their own instincts on the battlefield instead of blindly obeying orders from above. Or in short, they had independent minds. How would you personally strip a person of their independent mind? Well, you target people the moment they are born, right? Which is why they created a school system for all kids in Prussia. With it came 8 mandatory years that prepare students for the world, teaching them obedience, duty to their country, and general ethics. And it worked. Shockingly well. So well, in fact, that word started to spread beyond Prussia's borders, and one man, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, couldn't believe what he was seeing. His name was Horseman, an American politician who had spent years fighting a losing battle to fix his country's broken, chaotic schools. And when he arrived in Prussia, he finally found the answer he was looking for. Thus, back in the USA with a few of his friends, he began to push for common schools. The rules would be the same for every public school, and they would teach kids to be moral, punctual, united citizens who follow laws and work hard. And they did. Marvelously. But how did this highly organized school system spread so rapidly and became such a permanent part of modern society instead of fading away? Well, you can thank the Industrial Revolution for that. As millions moved into growing industrial cities, governments faced poverty, child labor, and huge numbers of children with little supervision or education. At the same time, factories and modern economies increasingly needed workers who could read instructions, follow schedules, arrive on time, and function within large authoritarian systems. Once the rest of Europe saw what was happening, once they saw how disciplined, how organized, how powerful Prussia had become, they of course wanted a piece of it. The model spread across Europe, then across the Atlantic, and eventually into much of the modern world, as more and more governments saw in it the perfect machine for producing order, obedience, and socially useful citizens at scale. The definition of dehumanization, according to Wikipedia, is the process, practice, or act of denying full humanity in others, along with the cruelty and suffering that accompany it. But let's keep reading, because the core concept is right here. Dehumanization can be overt or subtle and typically manifests in 2 primary forms. Animalistic dehumanization, which denies uniquely human traits like civility, culture, or rationality, and likens others to animals. And mechanistic dehumanization, which denies traits of human nature such as warmth, emotion, and individuality, portraying others as objects or machines. Sounds familiar? The second part. But that's not all. If you objectively rank it on the spectrum of systematic harms, it becomes alarmingly clear where it fits. If you were to put school on this list, it would either go above segregation or social exclusion, or above systematic dehumanization and structural violence. And I'm going to prove this to you. Now. Have you heard of Ivan Pavlov's famous experiment? He was a Russian psychologist who was the first to demonstrate how classical conditioning or unconscious learning processes work. Basically, what he did was take dogs and simply fed them. But before he gave them food, he rang a bell. By repeatedly ringing the bell right before feeding, he taught them to associate the sound with food. Eventually, the dogs salivated at the mere sound of the bell alone. And this is exactly the concept that bells in schools essentially weaponize. The education system is a huge artificial cube. You are completely separated from the outside world, and after years and years, you have absolutely no way of knowing that what is happening to you is not normal. Bells are absolutely dehumanizing if you define dehumanization as stripping away individual autonomy and forcing mechanical compliance by conditioning someone to react like a machine. And this creates so much unnecessary stress. And stress I can handle, but unnecessary stress is completely unnecessary. And while it is true that bells are practical and are required because of a school schedule, we have seen so many examples where some schools do not use them at all. There are other systems that achieve the exact same organizational goals without relying on these constant auditory controls. Despite these alternatives, institutions continue to rely on bells out of habit and tradition rather than necessity. But you know what is worse than exams and tests only accepting a single right answer and the education system teaching you that failure is bad? Grades. They are a single, simplified judgment of your performance on one specific task, on one specific day, according to one specific set of criteria decided by one specific person. That's all they are. But what does this actually mean to a child? Do you think a 5 or 6-year-old has the capacity to self-reflect and understand that this metric does not equate to his or her worth? An A doesn't just mean you did well on the test. It means you are smart, worthy of praise. A C means you are average, mediocre. You're somewhere in the middle of the pack and you should probably try harder. And an F? An F means you failed. Yes, you failed. And children absorb this deeply. Primarily because they do not yet have the life experience or the emotional tools to separate their performance from their identity. When a child is told repeatedly through grades and rankings and test scores that they are a C- student, they do not think I'm someone who scored C- on these particular assessments. They think I'm a C- person. Unsettling, isn't it? Here's what Albert Einstein had to say about grades. I felt that my thirst for knowledge was being strangled by my teachers. Grades were their only measurement. How can a teacher understand youth with such a system? From the age of 12, I began to suspect authority and distrust teachers. Wikipedia states that mechanistic dehumanization portrays others as objects or machines, denying their human traits like emotions. Well, school excels at this. Hunger, fatigue, focus peaks, the urge to urinate. I mean, how sick is that you have to put your hand up to go to the bathroom? Not to mention creative immersion. And sleep. They are completely ignored. But out of all of them, sleep is by far the biggest. The reason why literally almost every single teenager in school is sleep deprived is due to the circadian rhythm, the internal system responsible for keeping track of your sense of time and regulating many parts of your life, like healthy hormone production, your metabolism and digestion, your immune system, your cognitive function and mood, and yes, your sleep as well. But what you have to understand is this. Right when puberty starts, the circadian rhythm shifts forward about 2 hours. So if before you were naturally tired at 10 p.m., your body will now anticipate that you fall asleep around midnight. This, of course, is absolutely not acceptable for schools, as most students must wake up between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. However, when a school requires a 16-year-old to wake up at 6 a.m., it is not the equivalent to the same demand placed on an adult. For an adult, it would feel more like being forced to wake up at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. Also, because you have to wake up so early, you lose a large portion of your total REM sleep, the sleep phase responsible for healthy cognitive function, memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and many other vital functions, which just happens to occur in large quantities, primarily late into the night or morning. You can imagine what that does to a developing brain and body. Let me ask you something. What happened the last time you questioned or disobeyed your teacher? In a rational environment, a statement is true because it can be tested, proven, or logically defended. In an infallible hierarchy, a statement is true simply because the person with the highest administrative privileges said so. In school, the teacher becomes this single, unquestionable source of truth, one which you have to agree with, conform to, or face punishment. And it usually goes something like this. When you are told to do something, you do it without question. We are adults, you are children, and you are in no position to make the decisions at the moment. Telling this to a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 19-year-old, or anyone is absolutely not okay. During my years in primary and high school, I experienced my fair share of these moments, and I know I wasn't the only one. These arguments or confrontations, unfortunately, are really common in school. And I believe the time since the Prussian education system was put into place, we have lost that student-mentor relationship. It has wholly been replaced with the authoritative figure and subordinate relationship. The I know better because I'm older and have more experience than you do relationship. And this system being entirely built on fear and intimidation, with collective punishments being an everyday norm, doesn't help at all. Also, this preconception that a 12 or 15-year-old can't make a decision for himself or herself is absolutely wild. You being older with more experience than another person has no correlation whatsoever to whether you are objectively right or wrong. After all, a person who spent 40 years underground in coal mines certainly has a lot of experience. But surely that experience is not applicable to every situation or scenario, right? Well, you can bet that it is in school.